Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Rio Grande, 1950, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. The wind sweeps across the open desert plains, dust swirling against the boots of a worn cavalryman. His eyes, hardened by war and responsibility, scan the horizon, not just for enemies, but for answers. In the distance, trumpets sound, horses gallop, and soldiers assemble under a scorching sun, all while ghosts of the past stir silently in the shadows. A tale begins, not just of war or conquest, but of family, redemption, and wounds far deeper than any battle could inflict. The cavalry waits, but so does a mother, a father, and a son, all separated by duty and time. When the bugle calls, the men ride out in formation, but one figure among them isn't just another recruit. He's the commander's son, a decision not made in pride, but in quiet desperation to repair what was broken long ago. And before any sword is drawn or bullet fired, the battlefield of hearts must first be reckoned with. The stage is set on a remote frontier outpost bordering a rugged and untamed land. There are threats on the outside, raiding Apaches, dangerous terrain, and political pressure, but none more formidable than the tension in a divided family brought together by fate and duty. The commanding officer, a grizzled veteran of the Civil War, has spent years hardened by discipline, pushing aside personal pain for the sake of command. He's not a man prone to softness. His world is one of orders, loyalty, and sacrifice. And yet, that steely facade begins to falter when he sees a young soldier step off a wagon, a soldier who bears his name, who carries the same proud chin and fire in his eyes. A son he hasn't seen in years. A son he never expected to show up under his command. That first glance is anything but warm. The young man, fresh out of disappointment and failure, isn't there by coincidence. Having washed out of West Point, he's chosen this harsh path to earn back respect, not only from the army, but from his father. The tension is immediate. This isn't the reunion either of them wanted. One is bound by protocol, the other fueled by the desire to prove he's more than just a fallen cadet. Their dynamic charges every scene they share, and the cavalry base itself seems to breathe in the pressure of their unspoken battles. Then, like a sudden gust through an open tent flap, she arrives. Elegant, commanding, and armed with more resolve than half the regiment. His mother. The officer's estranged wife. Her mission is as straightforward as any cavalry charge: take her son home. She's not here to reconcile, not here to trade barbs or glances, but to extract what's hers from a place that reeks of gunpowder and regret. Yet the world has a way of altering intentions. She too finds herself in the grip of buried emotions, of half-healed wounds reopened by memory and proximity. And the cavalry life offers no sanctuary for emotional chaos. Out in the wilderness, threats mount. Apache raiders harass the outpost, vanishing across the border into terrain that American soldiers are forbidden to enter. The soldiers are outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and stuck between politics and principle. The commanding officer faces a dilemma not just in the war he must wage, but in the personal battles playing out beneath his own roof. The longer his wife stays, the more unresolved their past becomes impossible to ignore. She remembers the plantation, the place that was her home, her family's legacy. Burned down in a military order. Carried out by the man she loved. War didn't just scar landscapes, it scorched hearts. The tension between them flickers, fiery, painful, magnetic. Every word they speak is laced with the history of love turned bitter. Yet beneath all the formality and biting dialogue, there's something more dangerous: hope. Meanwhile, the young recruit doesn't shrink from hardship. He volunteers, steps forward, rides harder and fights braver than many veterans. Not out of rebellion, but from a place of deeply rooted need, to be seen, to be known. To forge a name unchained from the weight of heritage. His father watches, quietly, never tipping his hand. The wall between them is thick, but every skirmish chips it, every act of courage lays another brick of respect. The outpost is more than a setting, it becomes a crucible. One moment the men are serenading with harmonies and rustic ballads, the next they're riding hard into gunfire. The calm before each storm is as fragile as the truce between father and son, husband and wife. And when danger truly comes, it doesn't knock. Children are taken in a brazen raid. Not soldiers, innocents. And among them, someone close. Lines are crossed, both moral and geographic. The officer must decide whether to uphold his orders or save the lives hanging in the balance. He chooses the latter, crossing into enemy territory in a move that could end his career, but may save his soul. It's not just a mission, it's a statement. And those who ride with him do so not out of obligation, but loyalty forged from his quiet integrity. At his side, his son, now transformed. No longer seeking approval, but defending what's right. The rescue is daring, bloody, and brilliant. Amidst the chaos, roles are reversed. The father sees not a boy, but a man. A soldier. A hero. And the woman watching all of this unfold? She begins to see the man she once married. Not just the uniform, not just the hardened shell, but the one who once fought for what mattered, even when it cost him everything. As firelight flickers across their faces, there's a moment where time bends. Silence says what words never could. Back at the post, the cavalry regroups. The mission may have broken protocol, but it healed something far more significant. The family, once fragmented by duty and betrayal, stands together. Not perfect, not complete, but willing. The officer, no longer just a commander, steps into his role as father. The mother, no longer seeking to escape, sees a future worth rebuilding. And the son? He rides with his head held high, not because of the name he carries, but because of the name he's made for himself. There are no grand medals, no celebrations. Only a quiet moment of understanding, a passing glance, a softened tone, the way hands linger just a second longer. That's where the story ends. Not with victory or tragedy, but with grace. Through all its action, all its stirring cavalry charges and heartfelt ballads, the film never loses its grip on the personal. It reminds us that the most dangerous territory isn't always across the river or beyond the hills. It's inside us. The regrets we bury, the love we push away, the forgiveness we fear to offer. Those are the real frontiers. And perhaps that's why this story endures. Because beneath the dust and discipline, the salutes and sabers, it understands something eternal. That redemption isn't found in a uniform or a battlefield. It's found in the quiet return to what was lost. A family, scarred and scattered, finds its way back to each other, not by erasing the past, but by finally facing it. Thanks for riding with us on this cinematic journey. If you felt the story pull at your heartstrings or stir your spirit, give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives just like this one. Until next time, keep the fire burning and the stories alive. The sun bakes the dry earth as a cloud of dust trails behind a regiment of mounted soldiers. Their silhouettes, sharply etched against the horizon, ride toward the uncertain edge of the frontier. At their head, a commanding officer, seasoned by years of war and weather, rides with purpose, not just toward danger, but toward something far more personal. The world they enter is one of uneasy peace, broken treaties, and wounds that never quite healed after the war between the states. The cavalry's presence here is not just about control. It's a balancing act between politics, survival, and honor. The journey brings them to an isolated post near a volatile border, where threats from Apache raiders loom large. The men at the fort are rugged, competent, and weary. The terrain is unforgiving, and the enemies even more so. Life here moves with a rhythm of drills, repairs, campfires, and whispers of impending conflict. But the stillness is broken with the arrival of new recruits. Young men, green and eager, stepping into a world where obedience and grit are the only currencies that matter. Among them is a name that doesn't go unnoticed. He steps down from the wagon not with swagger, but with quiet defiance. His features betray his lineage before his name is ever spoken. The commander, standing rigid and unreadable, sees what the others cannot, his son. A reunion not forged in affection, but duty. The last time they saw each other, words were few and cold. Time has widened the gap, and now it must be bridged not by sentiment, but by command structure. The young man, dismissed from West Point in disgrace, has volunteered for service. But there's no talk of reconciliation. Orders are barked, glances exchanged, and the wound remains untouched. The boy is assigned no favors. He sleeps, drills, eats, and trains like any other soldier. Perhaps harder. Every movement is a challenge, a test not only of strength but of will. His father watches, though never openly. Pride and resentment wage war in his silence. The other men treat the newcomer with skepticism at first, but actions soon speak louder than pedigree. He keeps pace. He earns bruises. And in doing so, he begins to earn something far rarer in this place, respect. Meanwhile, something else stirs at the fort. News travels fast in places with little else to do, and the gossip of a commanding officer's son enlisting under his own father's command becomes background noise to a more surprising development, the arrival of a woman in a dusty carriage, finely dressed and fiercely composed. Her presence immediately disrupts the male-dominated rhythm of the post. This is no visitor passing through. She is his wife, estranged, determined, and with a mission of her own. She demands the return of her son. She does not plead. She states, with the cold precision of a woman who has spent too many years nursing betrayals. The past bleeds into the present with every word exchanged between her and the officer. Their conversation is clipped, their history weighing heavily between the lines. She hasn't come for apologies or explanations. She's come for justice. Her family estate, once proud and Southern, was burned during the war by Union troops, under orders signed by the very man who once swore to love and protect her. That wound runs deep, and now she stares him down with a fire undimmed by the years. The officer is unmoved. Or so it seems. He informs her that her son enlisted of his own free will. The decision stands. But her presence unsettles him more than any threat from the wild beyond the river. The men notice it too. The tension isn't spoken aloud, but it crackles in the air like static before a storm. The boy remains torn, loyalty to his mother, the sting of past shame, and the pull of a father who now commands him like a stranger. He does not beg to leave. Instead, he drills harder, keeps his back straighter, and volunteers for every task thrown his way. When a patrol goes out to chase down signs of raiders, he rides at the front. The risk is real, the terrain unforgiving. But it's in this danger that he begins to show what he's made of. The patrol encounters remnants of an ambush, burned wagons, scattered supplies, tracks that vanish into the brush. The Apaches are clever, fast, and elusive. The commanding officer knows pursuing them across the river would violate political. Meanwhile, something else stirs at the fort. News travels fast in places with little else to do, and the gossip of a commanding officer's son enlisting under his own father's command becomes background noise to a more surprising development, the arrival of a woman in a dusty carriage, finely dressed and fiercely composed. Her presence immediately disrupts the male-dominated rhythm of the post. This is no visitor passing through. She is his wife, estranged, determined, and with a mission of her own. She demands the return of her son. She does not plead. She states, with the cold precision of a woman who has spent too many years nursing betrayals. The past bleeds into the present with every word exchanged between her and the officer. Their conversation is clipped, their history weighing heavily between the lines. She hasn't come for apologies or explanations. She's come for justice. Her family estate, once proud and Southern, was burned during the war by Union troops, under orders signed by the very man who once swore to love and protect her. That wound runs deep, and now she stares him down with a fire undimmed by the years. The officer is unmoved, or so it seems. He informs her that her son enlisted of his own free will. The decision stands. But her presence unsettles him more than any threat from the wild beyond the river. The men notice it too. The tension isn't spoken aloud, but it crackles in the air like static before a storm. The boy remains torn, loyalty to his mother, the sting of past shame, and the pull of a father who now commands him like a stranger. He does not beg to leave. Instead, he drills harder, keeps his back straighter, and volunteers for every task thrown his way. When a patrol goes out to chase down signs of raiders, he rides at the front. The risk is real, the terrain unforgiving. But it's in this danger that he begins to show what he's made of. The patrol encounters remnants of an ambush, burned wagons, scattered supplies, tracks that vanish into the brush. The Apaches are clever, fast, and elusive. The commanding officer knows pursuing them across the river would violate political orders. Yet standing still only invites more attacks. The frustration mounts, and each failed pursuit raises tensions both on the battlefield and within his own walls. The woman stays, though she had planned to leave. Her son won't abandon his post. Her husband won't bend. So, she waits and watches. She sees the burden he carries, the careful mask he wears for his men, the distance he maintains from everyone, even their child. But moments pierce the armor. A conversation at dusk. A shared memory. A song played softly in the background while the men sing around the fire. These are the cracks through which something old begins to resurface. The boy too begins to find his place. A few soldiers become more than just comrades, they become a kind of makeshift family. Among them, a pair of Irish harmonizers bring lightness and humor to the barracks, while the seasoned sergeant offers the kind of mentorship a young soldier craves. Slowly, the barracks become less of a punishment and more of a proving ground. In drill formations, he begins to move not as an individual but as part of a unit. The officer watches from a distance, never offering praise, but always noting the growth. Inside, the conflict grows stronger. He sees his son becoming the man he had hoped for, but doesn't know how to reach out. The gap between them remains filled with years of silence and unresolved pain. Then the danger comes close. A wagon train, escorted by troops, is ambushed in broad daylight. Smoke curls into the sky, cries echo across the canyon, and the survivors stumble back with stories of masked raiders and vanished children. Among the missing, innocents. The implications are dire. The Apache are moving with boldness, knowing full well that the cavalry's hands are tied by orders not to pursue across the river. The officer's patience wears thin. The political restrictions now feel like shackles, keeping him from protecting those under his care. He gathers his staff. Plans are whispered. Maps are studied. He knows what must be done, but it will come at a cost. Disobey orders, cross the river and risk court-martial, or stay and watch more lives lost. While the decision looms, the family at the center of it all finds itself caught in a storm of emotions. The woman, watching her son transform into a soldier before her eyes, begins to question whether bringing him home would be saving him or stifling him. The man she once loved still carries the weight of his choices, but now she begins to see the struggle behind the stoicism. A glimpse of the tenderness that once existed between them flickers briefly in a quiet moment, and for the first time in years, neither speaks in anger. Tensions escalate when scouts bring word of the location of the missing children. They're being held beyond the river, under Apache guard. The officer makes his decision, not rashly, but with the full weight of command. He will go. He will lead a rescue mission, orders be damned. Those willing to ride with him are few, but fiercely loyal. Among them, without hesitation, is his son. There is no ceremony, no grand speech. Just a nod, a hand on a saddle horn, and the silent understanding that the choices made tonight may change everything. As they ride out under cover of darkness, every hoofbeat echoes with purpose. Behind them, the woman watches the two men she loves vanish into the wilderness, unsure if she will ever see either of them again. Out there, across the treacherous border, the real test awaits, not just of courage or leadership, but of heart. The battle to come will demand more than strategy. It will demand trust, forgiveness, and the willingness to risk everything, not for glory, but for family. And as the cavalry rides deeper into danger, the past and present ride with them, galloping toward a moment that will either shatter what remains or finally begin to heal what was lost. The horses move silently under a moonlit sky, their hooves muffled by the dry dust of the desert floor. The group is small, just enough men to ride fast and fight hard, but their purpose burns brighter than any torch. Each man rides with a grim resolve, knowing this mission is not sanctioned, not legal, and not without great risk. But it is necessary. Somewhere beyond the river, children are waiting, hostages of a conflict no one dares speak of aloud. Orders have tied the hands of those in charge, but that rope has now been cut. They cross the river just before dawn, the cool current biting at their boots as the last bit of lawful ground disappears behind them. Ahead lies the unknown. This is no textbook military operation. There are no backup forces, no reinforcements waiting in the wings. Just instinct, leadership, and the thin thread of courage stretched to its limit. The man who leads them doesn't show fear. He carries it tucked deep behind the eyes, where only a few know to look. He has chosen this path not for glory, not for redemption, but because doing nothing would be unforgivable. Scouts return with word of movement ahead. Smoke from a campfire. Apache horses tethered in a half-circle. The location is confirmed. The hostages are close. Planning begins. Quietly. Quickly. Timing is everything. A frontal assault would be suicide, but delay could cost lives. So, under cover of dusk, the unit spreads out, using the terrain as cover. The cavalrymen inch forward, rifles ready, hearts pounding like war drums. Then, the moment snaps into action. The camp is startled by the first crack of a rifle. Shouts rise, weapons draw, and the battle erupts in a flash of chaos. The cavalry moves like a wave, trained and determined, not to conquer but to rescue. Shots fire from every direction. Men fall. Horses rear. And amid it all, a young soldier, the one with a name shared by the commanding officer, charges into the fray with fearless precision. He moves toward the makeshift hut where the children are held. His actions are fast, instinctive. Bullets snap past him, but he keeps going. He reaches the structure, kicks down the door, and finds them, wide-eyed, scared, but alive. With a gesture, he leads them out, shielding them with his own body as the gunfire continues to crack through the canyon walls. Outside, the battle nears its crescendo. The commanding officer sees his son emerge, clutching a small child in his arms. And in that moment, amidst the smoke and screams, something long frozen between them begins to thaw. The mission is successful. The hostages are rescued. The Apache fighters scatter into the hills, and the cavalry regroups. There are casualties, but fewer than feared. The unit moves swiftly to retreat, knowing they've now crossed a political line that cannot be ignored. They cross back over the river with the dawn, their faces drawn, their uniforms streaked with blood and dust, but their purpose fulfilled. Back at the fort, the return is met with stunned silence. The soldiers ride in bearing not just the rescued, but a message, action taken in the face of bureaucracy, driven by heart. The commanding officer does not speak of what was done. He simply ensures the wounded are tended to, the children reunited, and the line of duty quietly redrawn. But word travels, as it always does, and with it, consequences. Military officials arrive within days. Stiff uniforms. Cold eyes. They are not here for celebration. They are here for judgment. An inquiry begins. The officer is summoned, seated before men who know neither the heat of the desert nor the cries of a child in danger. They ask him what gave him the right. He offers no elaborate defense. Just a simple truth. If doing the right thing is wrong, then perhaps the system itself is broken. What was meant to be a disciplinary hearing begins to shift in tone. Stories from the rescued children spread. Testimonies from the soldiers who followed him pour in. The inquiry becomes a reckoning, not just of one man's decision, but of the flawed machinery that binds men to blind obedience. Amid the turmoil, something unexpected takes root within the walls of the fort. The woman who once arrived to reclaim her son now sees him in a light she hadn't imagined. No longer the boy she tried to protect, but a man standing tall with purpose and conviction. She watches him interact with the others, not with pride, but with deep, humbled respect. He has found something here that she could never give him. And in that realization, her heart shifts. The distance between father and son narrows in quiet, unspoken moments. A shared drink. A hand on the shoulder. No grand apologies, but a slow rebuilding. They speak not of the past, but of the present. The pain remains, but so does the possibility of healing. As for the officer and his estranged wife, their story continues in subtle glances and honest conversations. She sees now what the war made of him, not just the uniform, but the weight of impossible choices. She may never forgive the past completely, but she begins to understand the man it forged. They walk together one evening beneath a bleeding sunset, not hand in hand, but side by side. And for now, that is enough. In the days that follow, word comes down from above. The inquiry results in no formal punishment. The decision to cross the river is declared a necessary exception. Quiet approval from those too afraid to say it aloud. The officer remains in command. The fort breathes easier. Life resumes, changed, but not shattered. The soldiers return to their routines, but with newfound respect for the man who led them into danger not out of duty, but out of compassion. The young recruit now drills with the seasoned stride of a man who's earned every stripe. No longer a symbol of his father's legacy, but a name etched in his own right. Even the two Irishmen, with their laughter and mischief, carry a deeper weight in their jokes, survivors of a moment that will linger in the dust and memory of this post forever. Around the fire at night, stories are told in half-whispers. Of that ride, that rescue, that battle by the river. The stuff of legend, born from necessity. The fort itself seems different. Less a place of exile and more a crucible where bonds are forged and broken men are made whole. And somewhere in the quiet, the echoes of that fateful decision continue to ripple outward, not just through ranks and reports, but through hearts. A new dawn rises, soft and golden over the hills. The flag flutters in the wind. Horses are saddled. Life moves forward. The commander steps onto the porch, eyes scanning the horizon. Not for threats this time, but for what comes next. His wife steps beside him. His son rides out in formation, a leader among peers. No words are spoken. None are needed. Because in a place where war once stole everything, something unexpected has been found. Not just redemption, but the fragile, undeniable spark of reconciliation. And though the scars remain, so too does the strength to face whatever the frontier dares to send next. He stands tall, even when the world around him crumbles. Not from pride, but from an unyielding belief in structure, discipline, and duty. His posture is a fortress, his eyes like polished steel, watchful, steady, with the faintest flicker of buried sorrow. This man commands not just with orders, but with the weight of experience that marks every word he speaks. Beneath his crisp uniform lies a soul lined with regrets, a heart encased in duty, and a mind forever at war, with the enemy, with the system, with himself. He's not just a soldier. He is the embodiment of a dying breed of leadership, shaped by battlefield scars and personal losses, carrying forward in silence what others would never dare speak of. His relationship with his son is not a wound, it is a battlefield. One he's fought on longer than he cares to admit. A silent war of expectations unmet, of words unsaid. Yet the tension between them is not built on hatred but on echoes of disappointment and misunderstandings. His son, once a boy who idolized him, is now a man forging his own path, and that truth rattles the stoic armor he's worn for so long. Still, there's a flicker in his eyes every time he sees him, the flicker of a father desperate to bridge the divide, if only he knew how. And the boy, the son, he walks into the story with more than just youth on his side. He carries defiance like a badge, the kind that masks hurt too long ignored. His shoulders bear the invisible weight of abandonment, and his voice, even in moments of stillness, quivers with unspoken questions. Why wasn't he enough? Why did duty always come first? He doesn't need to shout to make his rebellion clear. It's in the way he volunteers for the hardest tasks, the way he throws himself into danger not to prove courage, but to prove worth. And yet, beneath that storm of emotion lies the same steel that courses through his father's veins. He may not admit it, but he is his father's son, resilient, brave, and hungry for a cause greater than himself. Their journey is not a simple arc of reconciliation. It's messy, fraught with moments where words are knives and silence is worse. But amidst the chaos of war, there are glimmers, shared looks during drills, a nod of approval unspoken but deeply felt, the faintest smile after a battle well fought. These small, almost invisible moments begin to stitch something together, something fragile but real. He doesn't forgive overnight. He doesn't forget. But he begins to understand. And in understanding, he begins to heal. Then there's the woman who returns not as a guest but as a ghost from another life. Her presence unsettles the fort, not because she's unwelcome, but because she represents everything he left behind to wear that uniform. She's elegant, poised, but there's fire in her eyes, a fire fueled by heartbreak, loss, and the ache of watching the man she once loved become a stranger. Her love is not gentle, it's weathered, forged in the crucible of a broken home. She doesn't come seeking reconciliation. She comes to reclaim her son, but what she finds is more complicated. She sees the walls her son has built, and recognizes the very same bricks she laid down in grief. And yet, something within her shifts. It's not sudden. It's not dramatic. But as she watches the bond between father and son mend, as she sees the boy become a man in his own right, she finds a kind of peace. Perhaps not with the past, but with the present. She too has been a soldier in her own way, fighting to protect, to preserve, to survive. In time, she sees not just the man her husband became, but the sacrifices he made, and the pain he buried so deeply that even she never saw it clearly. Within the fort, humor hides in unexpected corners. Two Irishmen, full of mischief, full of mirth, move through the story like wandering spirits of chaos and comic relief. But they're not fools. Beneath their jokes lie bruises, stories of near misses, of comrades lost, of battles where laughter was the only shield. Their banter masks sorrow, their pranks guard against despair. They are the glue that holds the weary together, reminding everyone that humanity still thrives even where violence looms large. And in the ranks, there are other voices, men hardened by sun and sand, by the politics of survival. Each one with a story behind their eyes. Some follow orders blindly. Others question everything. But together, they form the spine of something bigger than themselves, a company that, under the right leadership, can move as one body, one purpose, one heartbeat. Even among enemies, there is complexity. The Apache are not faceless antagonists. They are people fighting for survival, for land, for dignity in a world reshaped by steel and manifest destiny. In their resistance lies a story as tragic as it is powerful. They are not evil, they are desperate. And in a few stolen moments of quiet, before the bullets fly, there are glimpses of mutual respect, perhaps even understanding, between soldiers on opposite sides of a war neither asked for. Back at the center of it all, the commanding officer remains the story's unmoving anchor. He changes not in loud declarations, but in quiet gestures. He lets the sun stand at his side. He listens when once he barked. He lingers longer at conversations he once would have avoided. And in one silent, powerful moment, he places a hand on his son's shoulder, not as a superior officer, but as a father. That simple touch says more than any speech ever could. This man, who once believed only in rank and regulation, begins to see something different in the faces of those around him. He sees the cost of his own decisions, the way his silence shaped a boy's pain. And though he cannot change the past, he begins, bit by bit, to change how he leads, how he loves, and how he lets others in. His wife, too, begins to soften. Not to forgive, not yet, but to see. She sees her husband not just as the man who left, but as the man who stayed for everyone else. The man who gave himself away piece by piece until there was barely anything left to return home. And in watching him rebuild a connection with their son, she begins to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's something still worth saving. As the dust settles on the final battle, and as the fort resumes its daily rhythm, these characters do not return to who they were. They have been reshaped, not just by war, but by each other. The son walks differently now, shoulders back, chin high, not because he's arrogant, but because he finally feels seen. The father watches him go with something close to pride, and for the first time in years, it feels earned. The woman no longer paces with uncertainty. She walks with a quiet strength, her purpose no longer rooted solely in what was lost, but in what remains. And around them all, the men who fought and bled together speak in low tones of what they endured, not with bitterness, but with a bond that only such trials can create. Even the landscape seems different. The desert no longer looks like punishment, but like proof. Proof of survival. Proof of transformation. In the end, what lingers is not just the sound of rifles or the marching of boots. It's the soft echo of redemption, of people discovering that even in the harshest corners of the world, there is space for grace, for growth, for healing. These characters don't ride off into some neat ending. They remain. They endure. They carry their pain, their victories, their losses, and yet they move forward. Not as broken people, but as whole ones, forged by fire and kept together by the fragile, enduring power of love. Sun-beat skies. Churning dust. Icons of leather, brass, and saddled horses. Yet far from the screen's rugged majesty, the truth of the film's creation is stranger and more compelling than its fictional battles. To begin with, this wasn't a film John Ford set out to make. He'd already wrapped Wagon Master and was itching to finally bring The Quiet Man, his dream project set in Ireland, to life. The studio balked. Herbert J. Yates, boss of Republic Pictures, had one condition. Ford had to deliver another cavalry western first. Thus was born this project, created as a ticket-punching talisman to unlock Ford's true passion, and the bargain stuck even when Yates declared, "Anybody but John Wayne." Ford retorted firmly, "If I can have my choice of cast." Yates relented. When Wayne personally apologized to Smooth Studio Feathers, Rio Grande became a fast-tracked battlefield, shot in just 32 scorching days to satisfy the deal. The budget was half that of its cavalry cousins, Fort Apache and Yellow Ribbon. Filmed in Michigan, Utah, and the stifling heat of the desert near Moab, the production was a sprint. 665 takes from 646 setups in just over 4 weeks. Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Rio Grande, 1950, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. Behind every great Western lies a dusty trail of secrets, some funny, some tragic, and others too bizarre to believe. What appears on screen may be all honor, heroism, and cavalry pride, but the world behind the camera tells a stranger tale. one marked by studio arm-twisting, death-defying stunts, misplaced guitars, and even electric lanterns hiding in the 19th century. It's a world where the grit is as real as the actors' sweat, and the legend was born out of a compromise no one expected. It all started with a deal, not for this movie, but for another. The director had a passion project he'd been itching to make for years, a romantic drama set in the green fields of Ireland. But the studio wasn't biting. They had other ideas. So they proposed a trade: make one more Western, fast, cheap, and reliable, and then you can have your Irish dream. Begrudgingly, he agreed. That compromise birthed this story, forged in the fires of a cinematic obligation rather than pure creative intent. And yet, what bloomed from that reluctant agreement would become something unforgettable. Production moved fast. Blisteringly fast. The crew had just over a month to shoot everything. In total, 646 setups, 665 takes, all wrapped in only 32 days. The terrain was unforgiving, the sun relentless, the budget half of what the previous cavalry films had. But with grit and muscle, they made it happen. The visuals were kept black and white, not out of artistic flair, but because it was cheaper. Even some shots and setups were recycled from earlier films to keep things tight. Amid this whirlwind, the actors and crew endured intense heat. The desert was no stage, it was real and punishing. In response, they carved a trench into the earth and threw a tarp over it. This makeshift pit became a communal refuge, a shaded oasis in the middle of nowhere where cast and crew alike took breaks, cooled down, and kept from fainting in the desert oven. It was so hot that even the film reels themselves were in danger of warping. But the heat wasn't the only threat. During a river crossing scene involving a cavalry charge through water, tragedy struck. According to first-hand accounts, at least 2 stuntmen drowned when their horses reared and bucked in deep, fast-moving current. The bodies were never recovered. The river in the film appears calm, but what lurked beneath was deadly. Even more shocking is that these scenes weren't filmed near the actual Rio Grande. It was shot in Monument Valley, nowhere close to the iconic river implied in the title. Safety standards, as we know them today, didn't quite exist then. One of the most famous sequences in the film, a breathtaking stunt where a rider gallops across open terrain standing with one foot on each of 2 racing horses, was performed for real. No wires. No CGI. Just balance, timing, and nerves of steel. The stuntman, who also acted in the film, trained for days to pull it off. He nailed it in one heart-stopping take, and the image remains burned into the minds of every Western fan. Speaking of unusual occurrences, the director had a strange way of dealing with visitors. When a studio executive unexpectedly dropped by the set one hot afternoon, the director, who was notoriously prickly with authority, welcomed him with a prank. He sent one of the actors in character as a flamboyant French waiter to serve the executive during lunch. The waiter spilled soup, shattered plates, and created a scene so absurd it left the executive speechless. The director never batted an eye, pretending not to notice the chaos he orchestrated. But not all strange happenings were intentional. The film is riddled with anachronisms. One musical number, beloved by many, features a song composed during World War I, despite the story taking place in the 1870s. The soldiers sing it cheerfully around a campfire as though it had been part of their upbringing. Elsewhere, eagle-eyed viewers can spot electric light bulbs tucked inside what are supposed to be oil lanterns. And then there's the guitar, a sparkling 1937 Martin D-45, wildly expensive and clearly decades ahead of the era. No cavalryman on a frontier outpost would have been issued such a prized modern instrument. But music wasn't a casual touch, it was a studio demand. Executives insisted that the sons of the pioneers be included. The director was against it. He felt their ballads didn't belong in such a gritty, grounded narrative. But in the end, he compromised, weaving their songs throughout the film as if they were a chorus echoing the emotional undercurrents of the characters. Strangely, What began as a forced creative decision turned out to be one of the film's most defining elements. The folk tunes brought a haunting, lyrical quality that still resonates with audiences today. Even the casting choices hold their own oddities. The leading lady was only 29 when filming began, playing a mother to a teenage son. Her on-screen son was portrayed by a young actor just 14 years her junior. But the performances were so strong and the emotion so authentic that no one questioned the age gap. Interestingly, the real-life son of the film's leading man also made his debut in the film, ushered into the movie world under the quiet mentorship of both his father and the director. That director, for all his genius, had a tempestuous relationship with the cast. He could be gruff, often cruel, but his vision was clear. He pushed his actors to the edge and occasionally beyond it. Still, many who worked with him, even those he shouted at, would later call the experience transformative. One supporting actor recalled the director ordering retake after retake of a scene in which he simply had to ride across the screen. Not because the take was flawed, but because the dust his horse kicked up didn't catch the sunlight quite right. After the sixth attempt, the actor stopped asking questions. The uniforms in the film weren't always accurate either. In reality, most soldiers of that era were thin and wiry. But the leading man, tall and broad-shouldered, towered over most of his comrades. He even wore a smaller hairpiece to make his character look older and slightly more weary, a man worn down by decades of duty. It was a subtle touch, almost invisible to the viewer, but meant to convey that this commander had carried weight few others could understand. And then there was the flag. The opening scene features the American flag with 48 stars, the official version from the early 20th century. But the story is set in 1879, when the flag had only 38 stars. This wasn't an oversight. It was a cost-saving choice. Accurate flags were harder to source, and the director wasn't interested in wasting time over a dozen missing stars. Despite all the quirks and oddities, the film was a box office success. It grossed nearly double its budget in its first year, helping to secure funding for the director's next and far more personal project. That film, a vibrant Irish love story, would go on to win Academy Awards and become one of the most cherished entries in his filmography. But none of it would have happened without the dusty, sunburnt, and bittersweet tale of the cavalry out west. The legacy has only grown over time. Today, film enthusiasts still dissect the visuals, the storytelling, the subtle performances that speak volumes in silence. Some find joy in spotting continuity errors or anachronistic props. Others marvel at the authenticity the cast brought to every salute, every gallop, every tear held back by pride. One thing's for sure, what began as a reluctant compromise became a triumph forged in resilience. And while the finished product told a powerful story of family, duty, and redemption, the real drama was unfolding just beyond the camera's frame, where heat exhaustion, budget restraints, death-defying stunts, and studio meddling conspired to make something far stranger than fiction. It's a testament to what happens when raw talent, unrelenting pressure, and a bit of chaos collide on set. What could have been a throwaway film became a Western gem not because everything went right, but because everything almost went wrong. And somehow, that made it unforgettable. The cavalry moved slowly across the open desert, dust rising behind every hoofbeat, while somewhere beyond the visible frame, the weight of years, of choices made and paths crossed, was catching up with them. At first glance, it was just another Western. Soldiers on patrol, Native American resistance, frontier families torn between duty and danger. But the more one watched, the more it became clear, this wasn't a film about action. It was a film about aftermath. The heart of the story wasn't in its galloping charges or gunfights, though they were executed with a precise sense of rhythm. The real tension came from silence, moments where characters lingered just a second too long in each other's gaze, or where words spoken about duty masked wounds that had never healed. Critics often point to how every major event in the narrative pivots on emotional conflict rather than physical confrontation. And that's where its power lies. When the commanding officer first receives word that his estranged son has joined his regiment, the moment hits harder than any battle. There's no triumphant score, no swelling orchestra. Just a quiet acknowledgement, a tightening of the jaw, a shift in posture. That singular beat of recognition is not merely a plot twist but a meditation on legacy, pride, and the emotional detritus of fractured relationships. The son doesn't arrive as a hero. He arrives as a test. And the father's composure becomes a battlefield of its own. Critically, this moment was praised for its restraint. Audiences had grown accustomed to explosive revelations, melodramatic reunions. But here, the emotional weight hung unspoken between father and son, their interactions laced with unexpressed affection and deep-seated disappointment. It's in the unsaid that the story begins to bloom. One of the film's most significant narrative pivots comes not from warfare, but from a conversation. When the mother, elegant, poised, and wounded in her own right, rides into camp to retrieve her son, she enters not as a side character but as a force of emotional reckoning. Her presence is electric. Critics at the time and even in contemporary analysis have marveled at how the narrative shifts its axis around her. She's not simply there to reunite a family, but to confront a man about choices that once fractured her world. Her calmness is deceptive. Beneath her words lies a fury kept at bay for years. In one of the most critically dissected sequences, she sits across from the commander at twilight, their faces framed by firelight, and they recount not just their personal failures but their interpretations of them. She speaks of the boy they lost, the wedge that was driven between them by military protocol and masculine pride. He speaks in clipped words, trying to hold onto the stoicism expected of him. But his eyes betray him. It's here that the film makes its most profound statement. Not about war, not about duty, but about emotional repression and its consequences. The scene has been lauded for its mature handling of grief. In a genre often defined by explosions and gunfire, to find a Western rooted in mutual vulnerability was, and remains, a rarity. The dialogue, while simple, is searing. And that burn doesn't come from anger, but from longing. They were once in love. And maybe they still are. But time, and the choices demanded by duty, have weathered them into strangers. Further critical acclaim has centered around how the film portrays the Native American characters, not as caricatures, but as a looming force shaped by context. Although limited in dialogue and presence, they aren't vilified for the sake of narrative convenience. Instead, they are presented as both a threat and a mirror. Their raids, while deadly, are rooted in desperation. Their resistance isn't evil, it's survival. This nuance was uncommon in the era and added a layer of ambiguity that critics still discuss. Another deeply resonant moment comes when a child is kidnapped during a raid. What begins as a tactical challenge becomes a moral crucible. The soldiers can pursue, but at what cost? If they leave the fort unguarded, others may perish. If they don't pursue, a child may die. This sequence is more than a mission. It becomes a symbolic reckoning. Critics often cite this moment as the film's ethical center. The choice isn't black and white. It's sacrifice versus principle. What are we willing to risk to save one? And what does it say about us if we don't? What's remarkable is how the pacing doesn't rush toward this dilemma. The build-up is slow, deliberate. Every decision carries weight. The cavalry doesn't charge off in haste. They debate, argue, and finally, with solemn resolve, ride out. The music doesn't swell. The dust doesn't rise like in a glorious march. Instead, there's an eerie quiet, a recognition that heroism in this world often comes at unbearable cost. Modern critics have revisited this sequence and praised it for its refusal to glamorize violence. There's no glee in the coming confrontation. Just inevitability. The final standoff, tense and tragic, doesn't play like a victorious finale. It plays like closure. Not triumph, but consequence. And that subtle shift is what elevates the narrative from Western spectacle to human drama. Thematically, the film weaves a deep meditation on masculinity, particularly the kind forged in fire, fear, and silence. Nearly every male character wrestles with identity through the lens of expectation. The young son, desperate to prove himself. The father, caught between his rank and his regrets. The supporting officers, each carrying private scars beneath their uniforms. It's not a film about men winning. It's about men enduring, failing, and occasionally forgiving themselves. Scholars often analyze the story through the lens of generational trauma. The father's choices echo through his son, just as the commander's old decisions reverberate through his present. The burden of legacy becomes its own antagonist. Can a man raise his son without destroying him? Can love survive under orders? The script never gives easy answers. It merely poses the questions and lets the characters wrestle with them. Emotionally, it's the moments of stillness that hit hardest. A father watching his son from afar, not knowing how to approach. A woman riding away without looking back. A soldier quietly breaking formation to hand a fallen comrade's letter to his widow. Each action is minimalist, but the emotional ripple is immense. These are the scenes that critics cite as defining, proof that restraint can be more powerful than spectacle. Interestingly, the songs, initially seen as out of place, have found new appreciation over time. Critics now view them as emotional bridges. The music provides a pause, a reflection, often acting as commentary on the scene that just passed. One tune, sung softly after a funeral, has been described in modern critiques as a lullaby for the broken, encapsulating grief without dialogue. That's where the brilliance lies, in letting melody speak when words fail. Some of the harshest critiques at the time of release came from those who expected something grander. They wanted thunderous showdowns, sweeping epics. What they got was a story that stared grief, failure, and pride in the face. But as decades passed, appreciation grew. What once felt small now felt intimate. What once seemed slow now felt deliberate. The film didn't age, it matured. One of the most celebrated scenes involves no action at all. Just a man writing a letter. The commander, alone in his quarters, finally puts pen to paper. The camera lingers as he hesitates, breathes, and starts to write. He doesn't read it aloud. We only see the act. But in that silence, an entire arc closes. The writing isn't just communication. It's surrender. He lets his guard down, acknowledges fault, and in doing so, becomes human in a way few Western heroes ever dared. This sequence has been called a masterclass in cinematic economy. No flashbacks, no exposition. Just a man, a letter, and the weight of all that's gone unsaid. It's a moment where the character, and the film itself, stops pretending to be about war. It's about forgiveness, earned, not given. And the audience feels it. Even the very last scene has drawn years of analysis. Some call it hopeful. Others, bittersweet. As the cavalry rides once more into the distance, what we feel isn't triumph, but tenderness. There are no grand speeches. No banners raised high. Just the knowledge that life goes on. That wounds, though deep, can heal. That love, though weathered, can endure. Critics have called it one of the most emotionally authentic endings in Western cinema. Not because of what it says, but because of what it leaves us to feel. It's in these moments, these quiet reckonings, that the story reveals its greatest strength. It doesn't shout its themes. It lets them settle, like dust after a long ride. Themes of honor, of redemption, of the aching distance between what we want and what duty demands. Themes that critics, then and now, continue to mine, not for answers, but for understanding. What began as a contractual obligation became something far more profound, a meditation not just on the frontier, but on the frontiers within us. And in doing so, it carved out a legacy that not only redefined what a Western could be, but what a Western should be. Let me know when you're ready for the final section, audience reactions and cultural impact, and we'll wrap this ride together in true cinematic fashion. Before the first shot was framed, the entire project seemed almost like a favor, an obligation to be fulfilled before a studio would open its doors to something grander. The filmmakers hadn't originally gathered with the purpose of telling this particular story. Instead, they were chasing a different dream, one that would involve fire, passion, and unforgettable imagery. But to reach that, they first had to ride through the dust and discipline of the cavalry. And so began a production that, while born of necessity, would come to define a genre and set a gold standard for emotional storytelling in Western cinema. The entire project came to life under a specific condition. The director, known for his towering stature in Hollywood and his stubborn independence, had his sights set on a deeply personal tale involving a fiery Irish romance. But the studio wasn't convinced. They wanted something more commercial. Something with spurs, rifles, and John Wayne in uniform. So they struck a deal. Make a cavalry film first, one that wouldn't challenge too many conventions, and then they'd talk about the Irish story. It was a gamble. One that would end up delivering far more than anyone anticipated. As production began, the casting choices weren't just calculated, they were nostalgic. The leading man and the director had already danced this dance before. This would be their fourth collaboration, and by this point, they didn't need to talk much. They understood each other's rhythms. A raised eyebrow on set from one meant a scene needed to be reworked. A pause in delivery meant a line wasn't landing the way it should. Their shorthand became legendary. And it created a kind of invisible trust on set. Actors followed that lead, instinctively aligning themselves with the quiet power of experience. But perhaps the most fascinating casting choice wasn't the leading man. It was the woman playing opposite him. There was history there. Real, off-screen history. She and the director had been married. Briefly. Tempestuously. And though years had passed, the embers hadn't fully cooled. Bringing her into the project wasn't just about talent. It was about chemistry, tension, and a bit of daring. Their scenes together had an edge because that edge was real. Every exchanged glance held layers the script didn't even need to write. Production unfolded not on vast studio backlots, but in the rugged terrain of the American Southwest. The location wasn't just chosen for its beauty, though it had plenty. It was chosen for its authenticity. The red rock formations, the sun-baked soil, the wide, endless skies, they weren't painted backdrops. They were real. And they demanded a kind of performance from the cast and crew that couldn't be faked. Horses stumbled on real rocks. Actors sweated under real sun. The grit under their nails and the dust in their throats weren't props. They were part of the experience. Working in such conditions wasn't easy. Days stretched long. Temperatures soared. At times, tempers flared. But something about the struggle fused the crew together. They weren't just making a movie. They were surviving it. One crew member recalled how the wardrobe team had to constantly re-dye costumes to maintain continuity. The scorching sun kept bleaching them out between takes. Another remembered the sound department battling relentless wind, improvising new ways to capture dialogue while nature tried its best to drown it out. Animals posed their own challenges. Horses, trained as they were, sometimes had minds of their own. In one memorable take, a spirited stallion took off before the scene was ready, dragging an actor behind and turning a solemn march into a slapstick moment. The director, watching through the lens, didn't yell, "Cut." He let it roll. And then, calmly, he walked over and whispered to the horse's handler, "Tell him we're making a drama, not a rodeo." But it wasn't just the environment that posed problems. There were moments of creative friction, too. The cinematographer, a quiet genius with an eye for light, wanted dusk shots to last longer. But the golden hour passed quickly in the desert. So they devised an unconventional solution. Giant reflective panels made from military surplus gear, positioned to bounce the fading light and extend twilight just long enough to capture the emotional beats. The effect was subtle, but stunning. Scenes glowed with an ethereal softness that couldn't be achieved through studio tricks. Music played a surprisingly central role during production. The inclusion of folk ballads and traditional tunes wasn't an afterthought, it was a deliberate creative choice. The musical group on set weren't just background performers. They were emotional anchors. One of the actors described them as the Greek chorus of the West, their harmonies adding weight to scenes without a single word of dialogue. At night, off-camera, they would keep playing, providing impromptu concerts for the crew and easing the pressure of long days under the sun. And yet, despite all the care put into each frame, there were unexpected surprises, happy accidents that no one planned but everyone welcomed. One particular sunrise shot, framed against a canyon wall, captured birds flying in perfect formation just as the bugle sounded reveille. The moment was so cinematic that people assumed it was staged. It wasn't. The birds just happened to soar at the right time. The director, seeing the playback, simply nodded and said, "Even the sky listens when we do it right." There were other little-known quirks during the shoot. For instance, several of the cavalrymen seen in long shots weren't actors at all. They were local ranch hands hired for the day. They were given costumes, brief directions, and asked to ride in formation. And yet, their authenticity lent a realism to the film that even the best Hollywood extras couldn't have faked. One rancher, after wrapping a day's work, told the wardrobe supervisor, "I've been doing this my whole life, but this is the first time someone paid me to do it without cattle involved." Humor, as always, found its way onto the set. The lead actor, known for his stoic presence on screen, often cracked jokes between takes, delighting the younger cast members with his unexpected goofiness. In one scene involving a tent inspection, he slipped a toy snake under a cot, waiting for a supporting actor to discover it mid-scene. The resulting yelp was so authentic that they kept it in the final cut. Craft services wasn't exactly glamorous either. Meals were often prepared by a traveling kitchen truck, and some days, the menu was determined by what could be delivered to the remote location. On more than one occasion, actors dined on beans, biscuits, and a mystery meat that no one dared to question. But even that became part of the camaraderie, a shared hardship that made the wrap party all the sweeter. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the production was how much trust was placed in silence. The director believed that if a scene could be told without words, it should be. That philosophy led to several rewrites during filming. Pages of dialogue were cut in favor of visual storytelling. Instead of a monologue, there would be a look. Instead of a confrontation, a pause. It was a gamble, but it paid off. Critics would later praise the film's quiet confidence, its ability to let audiences feel rather than be told. When it came time to edit, the post-production team worked with incredible precision. The goal was to create a rhythm that felt natural, almost like breathing. Scenes weren't cut to pace, they were cut to emotion. If a character lingered in frame for an extra second, it was because their emotion hadn't fully landed yet. If a cut happened mid-sentence, it was to echo the interruptions of real conversation. The result was a film that flowed like memory, uneven, poignant, and deeply human. What's perhaps most astounding is how this film, created under contractual pressure and practical constraints, managed to outshine expectations and touch hearts across generations. The studio may have green-lit it as a prerequisite, but the people who made it gave it their full attention, their full heart. And in doing so, they created something timeless. Years later, cast and crew would reflect on those days with a kind of wistful reverence. Many had gone on to larger, louder productions. But few had experienced the kind of quiet magic they found here. It wasn't the biggest budget. It didn't have the most lavish sets. But it had soul. And sometimes, that's all a story really needs. When the dust finally settled and the last cavalryman rode off into the editing room, what remained wasn't just a Western. It was a labor of love, a portrait of restraint, and a testament to what happens when craft meets heart, even under the most practical of circumstances. Let me know when you're ready to ride into the final chapter. Audience reactions and cultural impact, the moment we see how the world responded to what began as a simple promise and ended as an enduring piece of cinema history. Cameras hadn't started rolling yet, but the desert air was already thick with anticipation. The crew arrived early that morning, dragging heavy equipment across the uneven ground, their boots leaving fresh prints in the dust. There was an unspoken energy among them, the kind that only comes when everyone senses they're standing at the edge of something special, even if they don't quite know it yet. The sun climbed slowly, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. The location, chosen for its harsh beauty, was as much a character in the film as anyone in uniform. This wasn't some cozy Hollywood backlit. This was real country. Remote. Unforgiving. And it would test everyone involved. But the hardship started long before the first slate clapped. The shoot was greenlit not out of passion, but necessity. The director had another project in mind, one far more personal, but the studio wouldn't sign off until he fulfilled their request for a cavalry story. So he gathered his people, trusted collaborators, familiar faces, and a few surprises, and set out to make something they hoped would quietly resonate. One of the first surprises came during casting. The male lead, already a towering figure in American cinema, was a natural fit. He'd worked with the director before, and the two shared a language all their own, sometimes gruff, sometimes silent, but always clear. But when the female lead was cast, eyebrows raised across the lot. She wasn't just another actress, she was the director's ex-wife. Their marriage had burned brightly and fizzled fast, but their creative chemistry was undeniable. And now, they'd be playing opposite each other again, under the scorching sun, surrounded by sand, soldiers, and unfinished business. Their first scene together crackled, not with romantic tension, but with something more complex. Something layered. Between takes, their conversations were polite, almost distant. But when the camera rolled, something clicked. Old sparks danced beneath every line. The crew noticed it. So did the editor, who later chose to linger on their shared moments just a heartbeat longer, capturing glances that spoke louder than dialogue ever could. Elsewhere on set, camaraderie flourished. The supporting cast, many of them veterans of previous westerns, bonded quickly. Long days in costume, leather, wool, and dust, led to shared jokes, impromptu songs, and plenty of jabs at the unforgiving heat. One actor started a running gag involving an invisible canteen. Whenever someone groaned about the dry conditions, he'd dramatically sip from his magical water supply, always offering it with a wink. "Hydration is about belief," he'd say. And after a while, everyone started playing along. Then there was the group of singing soldiers. They weren't just background extras. They were hand-picked musicians who provided live performances on and off camera. At night, when the shooting wrapped, their harmonies floated through the camp like lullabies. Crew members brought chairs and cups of coffee, gathering around them in an unspoken ritual. For a moment each evening, the chaos of production melted away into melody. But not everything was smooth. Filming in such an environment came with real challenges. The desert winds were relentless, often kicking up sandstorms mid-scene. In one instance, an entire day's footage had to be scrapped because visibility dropped to near zero. Cameras were shielded with makeshift covers, blankets, plastic sheets, even pieces of wardrobe, to keep the sand out. One assistant director quipped, "We're making a western, but it feels like a submarine movie with all this sealing and patching." Still, the crew found ways to adapt. Dialogue scenes were restructured. Action sequences were shot out of order, depending on the light and the wind. Everyone learned to move fast, think faster, and keep laughing. A gaffer once rigged an umbrella to a C-stand using duct tape and a cowboy hat, all to shield a crucial lens during a wide shot. It looked ridiculous. It worked perfectly. One of the most memorable moments involved a horse that absolutely refused to cooperate. The animal, majestic and high-strung, was supposed to gallop past the camera on cue, dust trailing behind in perfect choreography. Instead, it stopped dead in its tracks, turned around, and trotted directly into the frame, nuzzling the lens like it was greeting an old friend. The actor riding it held on with a mix of panic and awe. The footage? kept in the dailies and played for laughs at the end-of-week viewing. The director himself, known for his unbending vision, surprised the crew with unexpected softness. When a young actor struggled with a line during a pivotal scene, he didn't yell. He didn't scold. He sat next to the performer, quietly sharing a story from his early career, a story about failure, nerves, and second chances. "There's no shame in stumbling," he said. "Just make sure you fall forward." The actor nailed the next take. Tensions flared now and then, as they do on any demanding set. But they never lingered. There was too much respect, too much purpose. If someone lost their temper, they usually showed up the next day with a peace offering, a coffee, a joke, or a makeshift gift from the prop department. One grip famously crafted a tiny saddle from leftover leather scraps and gave it to the cinematographer as a camera pony to help wrangle unruly dolly shots. Food became a recurring adventure. With no fancy craft services, meals were rugged and real. Beans, bread, jerky. Some days, a chuck wagon-style truck rolled in with chili that had bite and biscuits that could stop a bullet. Yet everyone dug in with smiles, often swapping bites like kids on a schoolyard. A visiting producer brought pastries from Los Angeles once. They vanished in minutes, leaving only crumbs and grateful groans. Injuries were rare but memorable. One stuntman took a tumble during a skirmish scene, landing hard on a hidden rock. Production paused. The medics rushed in. Everyone feared a broken limb. Turned out, it was just a bad bruise, but the bruise shaped itself into a nearly perfect star, and he proudly showed it off for weeks, claiming it as a divine endorsement of his stunt career. There were technical hiccups, too. One crucial lighting rig collapsed under its own weight during a sunrise setup. Miraculously, no one was hurt. The crew laughed nervously, then rebuilt it with reinforced scaffolding and dubbed the new version the Iron Angel. It stood for the rest of the shoot, a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. Between takes, the cast found ways to entertain each other. Card games flourished in canvas tents. A mock award ceremony was invented, with paper bag trophies handed out for Most Dramatic Sneeze and Loudest Horse Whisperer. Even the director wasn't immune. He received the tongue-in-cheek honor of Best Impersonation of a Cactus. The bond among the ensemble was undeniable. They became a kind of traveling family, sharing not just trailers and tasks, but triumphs and failures. When one actor received news of a newborn back home, the crew threw a spontaneous celebration. They carved a cake out of cornbread and sang lullabies under the stars. At the end of each week, the footage was reviewed in a makeshift screening tent. Folding chairs. A projector. Coffee in tin mugs. As scenes played, the crew leaned in, not with critique, but with wonder. They were watching their sweat, their grit, their laughter turned into legacy. More than once, someone wiped away a tear they hadn't expected. By the final week of production, exhaustion was real, but so was pride. They'd faced the elements, navigated creative curveballs, and built something beautiful from the bare bones of a contractual agreement. What had begun as a compromise had become a masterpiece. Everyone knew it. And they didn't need awards or box office numbers to prove it. On wrap day, a hush fell over the camp. The last scene had been shot. The last horse unsaddled. The desert was quiet again. One by one, crew members lingered, not wanting to say goodbye just yet. Someone started singing, one of the old tunes from earlier nights, and soon, voices joined in, soft and strong. It wasn't the end of just a movie. It was the end of a journey that had turned strangers into storytellers and a stretch of sunburnt land into something sacred. And long after the credits would one day roll, the stories from behind those cameras, the laughs, the tears, the stubborn horse, the desert winds, the unexpected friendships, would remain etched in memory, whispered like legends whenever the dust began to rise again. Let me know when you're ready for the next part, Cast Interviews and Legacy, where we dive deep into what the actors and crew have said over the years and how this unforgettable experience continues to echo through film history. There's something about stories set against the backdrop of the frontier that makes them feel both vast and intimate at the same time. The wide-open landscapes, the distant mountains, the endless sky, all of it sets the stage for something more than just battles or love stories. These tales, especially the ones crafted with care, dig into the marrow of human experience. Duty, love, redemption, and the push and pull between personal sacrifice and greater purpose. One film, in particular, threads these themes through every spoken line and silent glance, each scene a meditation on something deeper than what meets the eye. At the center of it all stands a man caught between two worlds, his sworn obligation to a military cause and the ghosts of his past, quietly riding alongside him like shadows that never left. He wears his uniform like a second skin, but it's the man beneath the surface that truly carries the weight. From the very first time he appears on screen, his posture, his eyes, his pauses, they all tell you this is a man who has made peace with pain. But that peace comes at a cost. And throughout the story, we see how that internal war, far more complicated than any battle against external enemies, defines not just him, but those around him. Duty stands as one of the film's most pronounced themes. Not the hollow kind of duty spouted in speeches, but the messy human version, where choices come with consequences, where right and wrong blur under the heat of real-life complexities. The characters are not caricatures of heroes or villains. They are flawed, aching, trying to balance the demands of a world that often forces them to choose between honor and heart. Nowhere is that clearer than in the quiet conflict between a father and a son. Their relationship, taut with unspoken tension, unfolds with both restraint and emotion. The son arrives not just as a fresh recruit but as a living reminder of a life once abandoned. He seeks validation, but not in the form of affection. He wants to earn his father's respect, on his terms. And the father, hardened by years of war and disappointment, doesn't know how to bridge the gap between expectation and love. Their scenes together are laced with a deeper theme, the generational divide between understanding and experience. The uniforms they wear may be the same, but the reasons they wear them are oceans apart. This theme of generational legacy echoes through the soldiers themselves. Many are young, uncertain, learning what it means to follow orders, to trust leadership, and to face mortality. They are not nameless extras. They represent the coming age, the hope for something better. In their eyes, you see fear, but also courage. And in how the older characters interact with them, there's a subtle symbolism. The handing over of ideals, the reluctant mentorship, the realization that nothing is permanent. Not war, not peace, not even one's reputation. Another thread woven into the film is reconciliation, both personal and communal. The fractured family at its heart mirrors a nation still reeling from civil division. The emotional tension between estranged lovers isn't just romantic. It's symbolic of a deeper healing process. Two people trying to find their way back to each other, despite years of hurt and hard choices, speaks to a broader desire to stitch together what was torn. Their conversations are often quiet, sometimes sharp, but always loaded with the hope of reparation. They're not just rekindling love, they're searching for a language that helps them understand who they are now, compared to who they were. The landscape itself plays a vital symbolic role. The terrain is dry, rugged, and unforgiving, an extension of the internal emotional landscape of the characters. It's a place where only the resilient survive. But it's also a place of reflection. There are long, lingering shots of the river, of dust clouds, of silhouettes at dusk that say more than dialogue ever could. These visuals aren't filler, they're metaphors. The river, especially, symbolizes transition. It's the line between old wounds and new beginnings, between separation and reunion. When characters cross it, either physically or symbolically, something always changes. Cinematography furthers this idea. The lighting contrasts, sunrise and sunset, light and shadow, are deliberate and poetic. Whenever there's a moment of tenderness or vulnerability, it's bathed in softer light. And during conflict or emotional walls being raised, the shadows grow longer. It's not accidental. The visuals help guide the viewer into understanding the inner world of the characters, even when their words are few. Leadership emerges as another nuanced theme. What does it mean to lead men? To ask them to risk their lives? And what does it cost to maintain authority while harboring personal doubts? The commanding officer is more than a figurehead. He is a man at war with his own choices. He must mask uncertainty for the sake of morale. But in moments of solitude, you catch glimpses of the burden he carries. Leadership here is not glory, it's responsibility. A heavy, relentless responsibility that isolates as much as it empowers. Loyalty and betrayal form a quieter subplot, explored not just in grand gestures but in everyday decisions. There's the loyalty of soldiers to each other, unspoken and sacred. The loyalty of families strained by time and distance. And then there are betrayals, not all malicious, some born of desperation or misunderstanding. These betrayals, small and large, speak to the difficulty of trust in a world where every relationship has been tested by hardship. One of the most emotionally resonant symbols is music. Far from being a decorative element, it carries the soul of the story. The songs sung by soldiers, the melodies that drift over campfires, they speak of longing, of memory, of connection. Music bridges the gap between action and emotion. It provides comfort, unity, and occasionally, commentary. A lullaby becomes a letter home. A hymn becomes a prayer for survival. These moments ground the characters in their humanity, reminding us that beneath the uniforms and duty lies a deep yearning for peace, not just external, but internal. Then there's the theme of sacrifice. It courses through the narrative like a heartbeat. Sacrifice of love for duty. Sacrifice of safety for honor. Sacrifice of pride for reconciliation. Each character, in their own way, gives up something essential. Some give it willingly. Others are forced. And every sacrifice deepens the emotional stakes. It's not just about who lives or dies, it's about who chooses what to let go of and why. The female protagonist's arc, in particular, embodies this theme. She arrives with her own agenda, her own pain, and a fierce protective instinct. She's not just a love interest, she's a mirror to the story's heart. Her strength lies in her vulnerability, her willingness to confront the past head-on. Through her, we explore forgiveness, resilience, and the cost of waiting too long to heal. Children are used symbolically as well. Figures of innocence, reminders of what's at stake, and glimpses of a future untainted by past grudges. There's a subtle but powerful message in how children are treated, protected, and educated. They represent the generation that will carry the consequences of current choices. In several scenes, their presence shifts the tone, adding emotional urgency to decisions that might otherwise feel strictly strategic. The narrative structure supports these themes with its pacing. It doesn't rush to reveal, nor does it linger in melodrama. Instead, it unfolds like life, moment by moment, decision by decision. The silences are as meaningful as the speeches. And the quiet choices, who looks away, who stays silent, who forgives, resonate longer than any cavalry charge. The finale brings all of these themes to a crescendo. Not through a spectacle of action, but through emotional resolution. Characters who began on opposite sides of trust find their way to common ground. Wounds don't magically disappear, but they stop festering. There's a sense that even in the dust and sweat of war, peace can find a crack to slip through. Not just peace between nations, but peace within families, within hearts. What makes the story linger in the mind long after the final frame is not its battles or even its romance. It's the way it gently yet powerfully poses questions we still ask today. What do we owe to our country, to our family, to ourselves? When does principle become stubbornness? When does forgiveness become strength? And how do we carry forward the things we love, even when the world demands we leave them behind? Another thread woven into the film is reconciliation, both personal and communal. The fractured family at its heart mirrors a nation still reeling from civil division. The emotional tension between estranged lovers isn't just romantic. It's symbolic of a deeper healing process. Two people trying to find their way back to each other, despite years of hurt and hard choices, speaks to a broader desire to stitch together what was torn. Their conversations are often quiet, sometimes sharp, but always loaded with the hope of reparation. They're not just rekindling love, they're searching for a language that helps them understand who they are now, compared to who they were. The landscape itself plays a vital symbolic role. The terrain is dry, rugged, and unforgiving, an extension of the internal emotional landscape of the characters. It's a place where only the resilient survive. But it's also a place of reflection. There are long, lingering shots of the river, of dust clouds, of silhouettes at dusk that say more than dialogue ever could. These visuals aren't filler, they're metaphors. The river, especially, symbolizes transition. It's the line between old wounds and new beginnings, between separation and reunion. When characters cross it, either physically or symbolically, something always changes. Cinematography furthers this idea. The lighting contrasts, sunrise and sunset, light and shadow, are deliberate and poetic. Whenever there's a moment of tenderness or vulnerability, it's bathed in softer light. And during conflict or emotional walls being raised, the shadows grow longer. It's not accidental. The visuals help guide the viewer into understanding the inner world of the characters, even when their words are few. Leadership emerges as another nuanced theme. What does it mean to lead men? To ask them to risk their lives? And what does it cost to maintain authority while harboring personal doubts? The commanding officer is more than a figurehead. He is a man at war with his own choices. He must mask uncertainty for the sake of morale. But in moments of solitude, you catch glimpses of the burden he carries. Leadership here is not glory, it's responsibility. A heavy, relentless responsibility that isolates as much as it empowers. Loyalty and betrayal form a quieter subplot, explored not just in grand gestures but in everyday decisions. There's the loyalty of soldiers to each other, unspoken and sacred. The loyalty of families strained by time and distance. And then there are betrayals, not all malicious, some born of desperation or misunderstanding. These betrayals, small and large, speak to the difficulty of trust in a world where every relationship has been tested by hardship. One of the most emotionally resonant symbols is music. Far from being a decorative element, it carries the soul of the story. The songs sung by soldiers, the melodies that drift over campfires, they speak of longing, of memory, of connection. Music bridges the gap between action and emotion. It provides comfort, unity, and occasionally, commentary. A lullaby becomes a letter home. A hymn becomes a prayer for survival. These moments ground the characters in their humanity, reminding us that beneath the uniforms and duty lies a deep yearning for peace, not just external, but internal. Then there's the theme of sacrifice. It courses through the narrative like a heartbeat. Sacrifice of love for duty. Sacrifice of safety for honor. Sacrifice of pride for reconciliation. Each character, in their own way, gives up something essential. Some give it willingly. Others are forced. And every sacrifice deepens the emotional stakes. It's not just about who lives or dies, it's about who chooses what to let go of and why. The female protagonist's arc, in particular, embodies this theme. She arrives with her own agenda, her own pain, and a fierce protective instinct. She's not just a love interest, she's a mirror to the story's heart. Her strength lies in her vulnerability, her willingness to confront the past head-on. Through her, we explore forgiveness, resilience, and the cost of waiting too long to heal. Children are used symbolically as well. Figures of innocence, reminders of what's at stake, and glimpses of a future untainted by past grudges. There's a subtle but powerful message in how children are treated, protected, and educated. They represent the generation that will carry the consequences of current choices. In several scenes, their presence shifts the tone, adding emotional urgency to decisions that might otherwise feel strictly strategic. The narrative structure supports these themes with its pacing. It doesn't rush to reveal, nor does it linger in melodrama. Instead, it unfolds like life, moment by moment, decision by decision. The silences are as meaningful as the speeches. And the quiet choices, who looks away, who stays silent, who forgives, resonate longer than any cavalry charge. The finale brings all of these themes to a crescendo, not through a spectacle of action, but through emotional resolution. Characters who began on opposite sides of trust find their way to common ground. Wounds don't magically disappear, but they stop festering. There's a sense that even in the dust and sweat of war, peace can find a crack to slip through. Not just peace between nations, but peace within families, within hearts. What makes the story linger in the mind long after the final frame is not its battles or even its romance. It's the way it gently yet powerfully poses questions we still ask today. What do we owe to our country, to our family, to ourselves? When does principle become stubbornness? When does forgiveness become strength? And how do we carry forward the things we love, even when the world demands we leave them behind? Every element, every landscape shot, every sorrowful melody, every hard-earned smile, is a brushstroke on a much larger canvas. A painting not of war, but of healing. Not of conflict, but of connection. In the end, it's not just a story about soldiers or duty. It's about people trying to find their way back to each other, across years, across battlefields, across rivers both real and metaphorical. And through them, we're reminded of the quiet power of grace, the enduring pull of home, and the undying hope that even the deepest divides can be bridged with time, truth, and love. Let me know when you're ready for the next part, Cast Interviews and Legacy, where we explore how this unforgettable journey has been remembered, revisited, and revered across generations. When the desert sun burns hot against a wind-swept horizon and the haunting notes of a cavalry bugle echo across a lonely outpost, you're not just witnessing a Western. You're entering a world where every frame has been crafted with purpose, precision, and a stubborn love for authenticity. There's a reason this film doesn't just play out. It rides, marches, and breathes in a way few others do. And the magic that brought it to life didn't begin in front of the camera, but deep in the dust and grit of the filmmaking trenches. From the earliest planning stages, there was a deliberate vision behind this story. One that required a strong directorial hand and a filmic style capable of communicating honor, duty, and the aching weight of sacrifice without excess or melodrama. The director, known for his distinctive blend of poetic composition and no-nonsense storytelling, leaned on a tried-and-true team, drawing strength from seasoned collaborators who understood the rhythm of his creative language. These weren't just co-workers, they were cinematic soldiers, each marching to the beat of a shared vision. Visually, the film is striking not because of extravagant sets or elaborate costumes, but because of its restraint. That restraint is born from a deep trust in the camera's eye to do the storytelling. Shot largely in rugged, sun-baked locations, the natural landscape becomes more than a setting. It turns into a character all its own. Long, sweeping shots of the frontier create a sense of vastness and isolation, echoing the emotional distance between characters and the daunting scope of their responsibilities. The wide frames weren't just aesthetic choices, they were meant to immerse the audience in the unforgiving frontier, placing them right alongside the cavalrymen riding into uncertain fates. The cinematographer used black and white film not as a limitation, but as a tool for drama and contrast. Light and shadow play a critical role here. Faces are half-lit, cloaked in moral ambiguity. Dust hangs in the air like a constant veil, softening the harshness of reality while lending an ethereal quality to otherwise brutal scenes. The chiaroscuro effect, those deep contrasts between darkness and light, underscores the story's emotional divides. Father versus son, duty versus heart, civilization versus wilderness. But the beauty of those images would have fallen flat without careful coordination between the film's camera crew and its stunt teams. The riding sequences alone required rigorous choreography, with experienced riders doubling for the main cast in high-speed chases and tight cavalry formations. Each pass in front of the lens had to look effortless and real. There were no digital touch-ups, no post-production cleanups. What was captured on film had to be perfect in the moment. The dust clouds kicked up by hooves weren't just dramatic. They were timed and positioned by writers who knew how to dance with the camera. And let's not forget the editing process, a quiet but essential force that shaped the emotional heartbeat of the story. Pacing was everything. In one moment, the camera lingers, a quiet exchange between two characters filled with unspoken tension. In the next, it jolts into motion, following a cavalry charge with raw, kinetic energy. These transitions weren't random. The editor understood when to breathe and when to surge, crafting a rhythm that kept the audience grounded even as the stakes soared. Sound design and music deserve their own moment in the spotlight. The film was built on more than just dialogue and gunfire. Listen closely, and you'll notice a subtle symphony of environmental audio. Boots crunching on gravel, wind howling across a desolate ridge, the distant call of an officer's trumpet. These elements weren't added carelessly. They were recorded with precision to heighten realism. The sound department even went as far as recreating authentic military commands and cadence, drawing from historical sources to ensure accuracy. But it's the music that carries the emotional weight. The score, composed with a deep sense of place and purpose, doesn't overwhelm, it uplifts. Songs are woven naturally into the story, performed by the characters themselves in key scenes. These musical interludes serve dual functions. They ground the narrative in a specific cultural moment and provide emotional relief during tense sequences. It's not often that a Western finds such balance between harsh reality and lyrical grace, but this one. Of course, none of this effort would matter without the film's performance at the box office. And in that arena, it exceeded expectations. Released at a time when audiences were hungry for stories of American resilience and unity, the film struck a chord. It didn't just draw crowds, it drew praise. Critics highlighted its emotional depth, technical prowess, and elegant simplicity. It wasn't the loudest Western of its time, but it was among the most respected. Box office returns were strong, particularly in rural areas and among military families, where the film's themes resonated most deeply. The financial success also carried a ripple effect. It greenlit future collaborations between the director and his trusted cast and crew, paving the way for another era of cinematic masterpieces. Industry insiders began to see the power of blending genre storytelling with personal drama, a formula that would influence filmmakers for decades. The movie became a quiet benchmark, often studied in film schools for its efficient storytelling, understated direction, and masterful use of tone. And yet, the true impact of the film can't be measured in dollars alone. Its influence lies in how it reshaped the vocabulary of the Western. By blending high-stakes action with intimate emotional arcs, it elevated the genre from mere entertainment to moral storytelling. The techniques used, whether in framing, lighting, or pacing, weren't just technical tricks. They were expressions of a deeper truth, a way of inviting the viewer to not just watch, but feel. There are moments, small and fleeting, that stay with you long after the credits roll. The look of hesitation before a soldier rides out on a dangerous mission, the tremble in a father's voice as he tries to bridge years of silence, the quiet strength of a mother watching from the sidelines. These aren't just performances, they are the result of painstaking craftsmanship behind the lens. In every shadow and sunbeam, in every gallop and gunshot, there's evidence of a team working in perfect synchrony, bound not by fame or fortune, but by the shared desire to make something lasting. The camera didn't just capture images, it captured intention. Every frame was a conversation between artist and audience, one that continues to resonate across generations. And so, what began as a modest production with tight resources and a scorching schedule evolved into a landmark of its genre. A film that proved sometimes the greatest adventures don't lie in what's shown, but in how it's shown. The sound of the bugle still echoes. The dust still swirls. And the legacy of the film, born from sweat, shadows, and silence, still rides on strong. Under the blazing sun of the American frontier, the men on horseback weren't just characters, They were icons. Faces etched with grit and purpose, voices weathered like the desert wind, and eyes that carried entire backstories with just a glance. The strength of the story didn't ride in alone. It was carried by a cast whose personal histories, professional legacies, and behind-the-scenes chemistry shaped every moment of the film's magic. They didn't merely perform. They lived it, and in doing so, left an indelible mark on screen. The commanding presence at the film's heart was already a legend by the time the cameras rolled. He didn't just wear the cavalry uniform. He wore it like a second skin. Tall, laconic, with that unmistakable drawl and steely resolve, he brought a towering sense of realism to his role. His demeanor never felt forced. His slow-burning authority was no act. Off-camera, he was known for his no-nonsense professionalism and a deep respect for discipline, which bled naturally into the stern, weathered leader he portrayed. Those close to the production recalled that he never needed to raise his voice to command a room. Just a nod, a look, a carefully timed pause would do the job. But what really deepened his performance was the unspoken vulnerability he carried. That slight hesitation in his voice during father-son confrontations, the way he held a letter a beat too long before folding it, the subtle sighs between scenes, they weren't scripted. They were choices. Intentional, intuitive decisions that revealed a man not just at war with the frontier, but with himself. Cast and crew alike noted his uncanny ability to slip between quiet tenderness and unflinching command, creating a layered portrayal that resonated far beyond the genre's expectations. By his side was an actress whose grace and strength defied the one-dimensional roles women were often handed in westerns. She didn't come to the screen as a helpless bystander. She entered like a storm wrapped in silk. Her presence in the story was both grounding and electrifying. Off-camera, she brought warmth and dignity to the set. In interviews, she spoke candidly about wanting to play characters who didn't just react to events, but shaped them. And shape them she did. The way she looked into her co-star's eyes and saw both the man and the soldier, those scenes didn't need dialogue. They carried the heavy lifting with silence. The tension between their characters didn't require raised voices. It smoldered in shared history, in gestures, in the weight of everything unsaid. That chemistry didn't happen by accident. According to those who worked closely with the two, their shared respect off-camera fed the emotional realism of their scenes. Between takes, they often conferred in hushed tones about scene structure and character motivation. It wasn't about theatrics, it was about trust. Then there was the younger member of the cast, portraying a character caught between childhood and manhood, war and family. He was relatively new to major roles, but his natural charisma and sincerity made him a standout. His energy offset the seasoned gravitas of the older leads, injecting a note of youthful idealism into a story otherwise steeped in weary realism. He trained intensively for his role, learning horseback riding and military drills alongside the cavalry extras. The discipline showed. Audiences and critics alike later praised the authenticity of his transformation, from raw recruit to hardened soldier. Years later, fan clubs and retrospectives kept the film's legacy alive. Rewatchers praised the performances for revealing new layers with every viewing. Online forums filled with quotes and scene analyses, dissecting every line, every glance, every pause. At anniversary screenings, audiences still sat in reverent silence during the final scenes, moved as if watching for the first time. And the cast, over the years, reflected on their time in the production with a quiet pride. In reunion interviews, they spoke of how the film changed their approach to acting, to storytelling, to life itself. One of the younger actors confessed that it was during those long, dusty shoots that he decided to fully commit to his craft. An older castmate admitted that he hadn't realized just how powerful the film was until he saw it in a packed theater and heard the silence at the end, the kind of silence that speaks louder than applause. The legacy also lives in the tributes made by other filmmakers. Directors who grew up watching the film referenced it as a major influence. They borrowed its framing techniques, its tonal balance, its commitment to character over spectacle. For many, it became a textbook in subtlety. How to say more with less, how to show conflict through posture and glance instead of shouting and gunfire. Looking back, it becomes clear that the soul of the film didn't reside in its story alone, but in the people who brought it to life. In the gravel in their voices. In the dust on their boots. In the honesty of their performances, forged not in studio backlots but under real skies, with real stakes. These weren't just actors and crew members, they were part of a collective memory, a living story preserved not just in celluloid, but in hearts. And every time a viewer sits down to revisit the film, they don't just watch, they remember. They feel. They connect. Because the cast didn't just play roles. They carried truths, raw, complex, enduring truths, that continue to ride across time, like a distant cavalry bugle echoing through a desert that never really forgets.